All right, so let's dive right into this. Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom. We had a listener write in, actually sent us their review of the movie, and
Okay.
they seemed to really like it. Visually, they thought it was really cool, but they had some, issues with the plot, some things that they just couldn't quite wrap their heads around, and wanted us to unpack a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's something a lot of people have those issues sometimes. Even in a big, summer blockbuster movie, when you walk out and you're like, well, that was fun, but wait a minute.
Right. Like, how does that even make sense?
Exact.
And
So,
it's like you have this beautifully woven tapestry, and then there's this one little thread, and you're like, if I tug on that, is the whole thing gonna
unravel, right?
unravel? Yeah, exactly. So we're gonna be looking for those loose threads.
I love it. That's a great analogy. And it's true, because sometimes it's not just about whether a movie is good or bad, but it's about, why it works, why it doesn't work. And I think in the case of Fallen Kingdom, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of jumped out, both from this listener's review, but also from just a lot of the discussion around this film, is that there seems to be some internal logic that doesn't quite track, even from the very beginning.
Yeah, and I think a perfect example of that is the Mosasaurus.
Oh, the Mosasaurus.
In the first Jurassic World, it's very clearly established that the Mosasaurus is contained within a lagoon. It's in the center of the island. And then suddenly, in Fallen Kingdom, there's this gate.
It's out.
Yeah, it's out. There's this gate that leads right out into the ocean. And it's never really explained how that gate got there.
It's like, how did they build that? Like, what was the thought process there?
Right. And why would you have a gate that leads from your Mosasaurus pen directly into the ocean? It seems like a major design flaw.
Yeah, that's not a good idea.
And it raises this question of, you know, how much did the filmmakers really think about the world that they were creating? Or were they so caught up in trying to create these big, spectacular set pieces that they forgot about the logic?
It's like they needed something cool to, like, kick off the movie. So it's like, let's get the Mosasaurus out there. That'll be awesome.
Exactly.
But it doesn't quite make sense. And also, I mean, if it's been in this lagoon this whole time, what's it been eating?
Right. 3 years.
They never show us, like, a giant pile of fish carcasses. They don't show us, like, scuba divers dumping in chum. It's just like,
Yeah.
how is this thing still alive?
Yeah, it's like they forgot that animals need to eat to survive.
Yeah.
And it's a shame because that whole idea of the Mosasaurus escaping into the ocean could have been really interesting. It could have been this consequence of, humanity's hubris. Like we try to control nature and then it finds a way, to quote a very famous character from Jurassic Park. But instead, it just feels like this random plot point that's never really explored.
Yeah, it's like they didn't think about the ramifications, just thought it'd be a cool visual, which, don't get me wrong, it was a cool visual, but I wish there was a little bit more meat on the bone there.
Right, exactly. It's style over substance, which unfortunately is something we're going to see again and again in this film.
And speaking of things that don't quite make sense, let's talk about some of the characters and some of the decisions that they make.
Yes, because if you're asking me to believe in a world where dinosaurs exist,
Right.
which, I'm on board with,
I am too.
but you got to give me characters that make sense within that world.
Right, totally.
And I think that's one of the areas where Fallen Kingdom really stumbles.
Yeah, and you pointed out one that I thought was really funny. The tech guy who's got the one earbud in.
Yes, with the dinosaurs running
Yeah.
rampant. He can't hear anything. Come on, man.
Classic.
It's like, you're telling me that in a world with dinosaurs, workplace safety standards haven't improved.
You'd think they'd up their game a little bit.
Right. You would think.
Yeah.
And it's these little details that take you out of the movie.
Yeah.
Because you're like, that's just sloppy.
Yeah, it feels a little bit, I don't know, it feels like they're not really thinking about the characters. They're just thinking about what needs to happen next in the plot.
Right, exactly. The characters become plot devices instead of people.
And speaking of characters making, let's say, questionable decisions, we got to talk about Ian Malcolm.
Oh, Ian Malcolm. He's back.
He's back, which, you know what? I'm here for it.
I am too. I love Ian Malcolm.
Love Jeff Goldblum.
Always.
Always. But his whole stance on the life finds a way.
Right.
It doesn't quite track with what he does in this movie.
No, it doesn't at all. Because he's the one who warned us. He said, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Right. Some of the most iconic lines from that first movie.
Exactly. And he's the voice of reason. He's the one saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't mess with nature. But then he turns around and he's like, yeah, let's go back to the island.
Let's do this.
I was like, what happened, man?
Yeah, what changed?
Did you learn nothing from the first movie?
He saw what happened. He was there.
Exactly. And the movie tries to give him some reasons, you know?
Huh?
Oh, I have to save humanity. But it feels a little flat.
It doesn't quite land.
It doesn't quite land, no.
No.
And it's a shame because Ian Malcolm is such a great character and he has so much potential. And to see him kind of, I don't know, wasted like that,
Yeah.
it's disappointing.
It is a little disappointing. And it's like that tapestry thing again, where it's like you start tugging on that thread and you're like, wait a minute. If he doesn't believe this anymore, then like, what does this movie even stand for?
Exactly. If Ian Malcolm isn't the voice of reason, then who is?
Who is? Yeah. It's like they brought Ian Malcolm back just because they felt like they had to.
Right, like they needed his star power,
Yeah.
but they didn't know what to do with him.
Yeah.
And it's not just the returning characters that have these kinds of issues. You mentioned in your review that some of the new characters, like the veterinarian, for example,
Right.
felt kind of underdeveloped.
Yeah.
Like they're just kind of there. Yeah. And it's a common problem with sequels, right? You got to up the ante. So you add more characters, more dinosaurs, more explosions. But sometimes that comes at the expense of, actually developing those characters, giving them depth, giving them a reason to care.
Right. Like, why should we care about these people? We barely know them.
Exactly. And in the case of Fallen Kingdom, those underdeveloped characters, they just add to this sense that the filmmakers were more interested in setting up future installments than they were in telling a satisfying story in the present moment.
Right. Like they had one eye on the sequel already,
Exactly.
and they weren't really focused on this movie.
Yeah, it's a shame. And speaking of things that don't quite add up, can we talk about the Indoraptor for a second?
Oh, the Indoraptor.
I mean, I get it. Hybrid dinosaurs, cool. We've seen it before. The Indominus Rex, that was cool.
It was scary.
It was scary. But the Indoraptor, it just felt like a step too far.
Too much.
Too much. And it kind of highlights this key difference, I think, between the original Jurassic Park and what Jurassic World has become. In the creation of the dinosaurs, it was presented as this cautionary tale.
Right.
Like, hey, don't mess with nature.
Life finds a way.
Exactly. But in Fallen Kingdom, the creation of the Indoraptor, it doesn't feel like a cautionary tale. It just feels like, oh, we need a monster.
Yeah, it feels very plot devicey, like very convenient that they happened to create this thing.
Right. It's just there to cause mayhem and destruction. There's no real exploration of, like, why would someone create this thing? What are the ethical implications of this?
Right, like who signed off on that?
Exactly. It's just like, oh, well, it's a monster movie now, so let's just have a monster. And, I love monster movies.
Me too.
But the best monster movies, they have something to say.
Right, there's a reason for the monster to be there.
Exactly. And the Indoraptor, it just doesn't have that.
Yeah.
It's just a bunch of cool CGI, which, again, don't get me wrong, it looks cool.
Looks cool.
But it's empty. And that emptiness, it kind of carries over into the ending of the movie, which, as you pointed out in your review,
Oh boy, that ending.
releasing all those dinosaurs into the world,
Just like that.
what are they thinking?
It's like they threw their hands up and said, we don't know what to do. You figure it out.
It's such a weird choice. And look, I'm not saying that a movie shouldn't have a cliffhanger ending, but it needs to feel earned. It needs to feel like it's coming from a place of, like, narrative logic.
Right.
This just feels like, oh, we painted ourselves into a corner.
Chaos. Chaos sells.
Yeah. Like, how could we possibly top ourselves?
Yeah,
No, let's just release all the dinosaurs.
it's like they said, to heck with it. Let them loose. And, it's a shame because, like, on the one hand, I kind of admire the boldness of it.
I do too. It's certainly a choice.
Like, they're really shaking things up. We're not on the island anymore. We're talking about dinosaurs roaming the mainland.
Yeah, like what happens next?
The possibilities are kind of endless, right?
Right. It's like, how does society deal with this?
Right. Like, do we create, like, dinosaur reservations?
Exactly. Do we try to, like, integrate them into our world?
Do we just accept that we're not at the top of the food chain anymore?
Right. And those are all really interesting questions. But the problem is, we don't get any answers in this movie.
No.
And it leaves you feeling kind of empty.
It does. It's like they just threw a bunch of puzzle pieces in the air and said, good luck putting that together.
Right. And that's not to say that every movie needs to tie everything up in a neat little bow.
Sure.
But the questions that it leaves you with, they need to feel like they're coming from a place of, like, intentionality. Like the filmmakers thought about this.
Yeah, like they want us to think about these things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This ending just feels like, honestly, it feels like laziness.
It does. A little bit, yeah. So, all right. We've talked about the inconsistencies, the characters making some head-scratching decisions, this underdeveloped plot points, and that, well, explosive ending. What's the takeaway here? What does Fallen Kingdom mean for the Jurassic Park franchise?
I think it's a cautionary tale. It
Oh,
shows you what can happen when you prioritize spectacle over substance.
right.
When you're so focused on the big flashy set pieces
Yeah.
that you forget about the story, you forget about the characters.
And you forget about logic.
Exactly. And you end up with a movie that's entertaining on a surface level.
It's fun to watch. Don't get me wrong. I still enjoy these movies.
You too.
Oh,
But they're not Jurassic Park.
yeah.
They don't have that same magic.
That's a good way to put it. It's like they're chasing something that they can never quite catch.
Exactly. And that's kind of sad in a way. But, maybe the next film, maybe they'll learn from the mistakes of Fallen Kingdom and they'll find a way to bring back that sense of wonder.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, if life can find a way to bring back dinosaurs,
Right.
maybe a filmmaker can find a way to make a good Jurassic Park movie again.
That's what I'm hoping for.
I'm with you. All right, that's going to do it for us on this deep dive into Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Big thanks to our listener for writing in and to everyone for listening. We'll catch you next time.